Park Avenue. There was this old house that stood along there for many years, abandoned. It was like torn down like 10 years ago. And that was the Civil War house. And then the Henry Meals house, I think this still stands on the other side of Willoughby's Run. Before you get to Willoughby Run Road, Henry Meals. And I think a couple of his brothers live in the town. One of his brothers is in the Union Army. They were stone masons, and they did a lot of tombstones in Evergreen Cemetery. We have a Dixon house you don't know much about. Emanuel Pitzer over there, that is the Pitzer Farm or the Brown Ranch. The nice farm behind North Carolina. And down here we have George Culp. George Culp's house, which is along Willoughby's Run Road, no longer stands, just a hole in the ground. At the Adams County Historical Society, we have a letter that was given to the society by the Culp descendants. And it's a note left in their kitchen by a Confederate soldier. And it says, like, we don't know what they did to the house, but it says something like, we of the 8th Alabama Infantry did this. And it says something like, remember, and you will get a lot more next year when we come again if you don't stop turning our women and children out of their houses in Virginia. Something like that. Really nasty note. Okay. Now, Emanuel Pitzer, you probably know this story. I'll make it simple. Just before the battle, June 18th, Emanuel Pitzer died. And he didn't trust banks, and he had all his money in gold and silver coins and some currency. And the family was getting ready to divide up the estate, and they had the money in their house when the Confederate invasion occurred. One of the sons took it outside, put it in the bake oven under a stone. A guy in Wright's Brigade from Georgia, a friend of his was killed on July 2nd, and after the fighting, he went down to the farm, was looking for a flat stone to make a tombstone out of, lifted it up out of the floor, and noticed a cavity in the floor with gold and silver coins, and dropped the stone, took the money, and went AWOL. And the story is told by a friend of his in the company. And in the 1880s, this friend came back and told the family what happened to the money. And the family, the Pitzer family, had always believed that one of their relatives had taken it. And there was a family feud as to who stole the money. It was $3,000. Now they don't know, because I don't know if anybody knew exactly how much, but in all the accounts, it says about $3,000. We know the story's true because in the claims file for the Pitzer farm, like done in like 1869, there's an affidavit by George Culp, the next door neighbor, that he knows they stole money, about $3,000 in gold and silver coins from their house. So they asked for it from the state of Pennsylvania to get it back, but they didn't. That's a pretty wild story.
But Tim, if they filed a claim on it, then they have to say it was enemy action, right?
Yeah.
So they couldn't really have believed that it was a relative.
Okay. They're fighting both sides.
All right.
Well, I can tell you, we do have a specific account that mentions it's one of their relatives, or they suspect one of their relatives. What did I do there? That doesn't make any sense. So the Bliss farm, of course, if you're going to talk about people not getting paid for their damages, it's probably the worst case. You know, the guy's farm was burned down by the order of a Northern general, Alexander Hayes, by Northern soldiers. And after the war, he's trying to get compensation for his losses, and he's not able to. But you know, we have an interview with William Bliss, and in the interview in 1865, now I should point out this is before he finds out he's not going to get any money. He says, "Let it go. If I had 20 farms, I would give them all for such a victory." I think that's nice. So the Emmitsburg Road, you know, of course, these are the more famous farmhouses because many of them still stand, and because a lot of people, you know, spend time on the Emmitsburg Road, and because they were purchased early on and are in the Gettysburg National Military Park. So Nicholas Kaddouri, the Kaddouris did not purchase that farm until the 1850s, and they bought a log cabin, and later it was made into a brick house. So we don't know the exact date, but we do know that the Kaddouris don't live there. They live in the town on York Street, and a tenant farmer lives there. And we argue about what the identity of the tenant farmer is. How do we know who owns a farm if it's being rented at the time? How do we know? So there's some problems there. The Klingels do live on the Emmitsburg Road. The Klingel house has been restored. It's pretty nice. The Rogers house, Peter Rogers, that house no longer stands. Henry Spangler, we mentioned. And see, I do have the tenant, Jacob Eckenrode. It's Jacob Eckenrode and his father, Nicholas Eckenrode. So two Eckenrode families are the tenants at that time. I don't know why I didn't put both of them if I'm going to put one. And then the Staub house. I tell you, the Staub house may have been there during the battle. Or the Staub house may have been built right after the battle. The park historian Kathy George is a big proponent that the house was not there at the time. But John Batchelder, on his isometrical map of the battlefield, he puts it on there. And to me, tax list suggests it's built in 1862. But John Staub is in the 165th Pennsylvania Infantry. So he is vacant from his property from November of 62 until late July of 63. And his daughter seems to be living downtown, or his wife seems to be living downtown with her father at the time of the battle anyway. So even if the house is there, it was just built and it's a vacant structure. So some of these questions are difficult to answer about who lived where. And then, of course, I put on here Sherfy and Trossel. And I like that I put the owners of these two houses over here on the Millerstown Road. They're usually not given on maps of the battlefield. On the northern side of the road, it's the Christian Schiffer. It's a weird spelling. Schiffer house. And then on the south, of course, James Warfield, who moved to Gettysburg, I think in 1862. And he was black, and he was a blacksmith, and he came from Uniontown, Carroll County, Maryland. And then, of course, at the intersection of the Wheatfield Road, we have John Wentz, who has a son, Henry Wentz, in one of the Confederate artillery units of E. Porter Alexander during the battle. And let's see some photographs there. Here's the Emmitsburg Road, first of all. And, you know, we often think of these roads as being nice, navigable, I can't even say that, roads. These are dirt roads. And they're very dusty or they're very muddy. Of course, the Kaddouri farm we mentioned, the house was built in the 1850s, 1857 maybe. And the back of it was actually put on in 1876. So it didn't have that back addition. And a tenant lives there, like we said. Now, the Kaddouri family tells us that the Staubs lived there at the time of the battle because the Staub house wasn't built. But we have another account that a Tabitha Riley is living there at the time, and her father is John Barrett, and Tabitha just married and said she's living there in one of the accounts she has, or maybe her son has. And John Barrett, her father, if you remember, is like John Burns' nemesis. He's a constable in the town, and they're always fighting with each other. Here's the 1882 photograph of the Kaddouri farm. from the Cyclorama series, and it shows a slaughterhouse that was built on the west side of the Emmitsburg Road that was not there at the time of the battle. Here's a really neat view before the addition was put onto the back of the Kadoorie House. And it's a view looking down the Emmitsburg Road. It's got to be around 1876 because the slaughterhouses, or that might be the Spangler Barn, I guess. It's hard to say. But there looks like a building on the other side of the road. Well, anyway, it's around 1876, and it's our first real view of the Emmitsburg Road across which Pickett's division, charged on July 3rd. Of course, I think if you were watching, I just watched that part not too long ago where Ted Turner's killed right there. And here I just put another view of some of those farmhouses in on our map. Here's the Rogers house on the right side of the view. Now, this drawing was done in the 1880s, and it was done by Charles Reed, a sketch artist. And these drawings were made for Battles and Leaders of the Civil War, which was a series that was done for Century Magazine. And I think this actually appears in an article by Henry Hunt. And so he's drawing this in the 1880s, but he's showing you the Emmitsburg Road at the time of the battle. On the right's the Rogers house, and down the road, that's the Sherfy barn on fire. And on the left is the Klingel farm. Although I can assure you, if you stand at the Rogers house, you cannot see the Sherfy barn. It's over the hill and around the corner. But it's kind of neat. Here's Peter Rogers